Hi everybody, I'm Junichi Kubo. Today, I would like to talk about the customer segregated fund trust, which are part of the scheme to protect customers of securities firms. What kind of people are customers of the securities firm? Let me show you examples. People who want to sell their shares. They first deposit their shares with the securities firm. The securities firm then sells the shares at the securities market and pays the sales proceeds to the customers. People who want to buy shares, they deposit purchase money. The securities firm then purchases the shares at the securities market and delivers the shares to the customers. People who want to use custody services, they deposit their securities and the securities firm keeps them safe for the customers. People who want to conduct margin transactions, they first deposit margin money with the securities firm as collateral and buy and sell securities with securities and money borrowed from the securities firm. Selling shares on margin is done as follows. The customers will make a profit by buying back E-Corp shares at a cheaper price and returning them to the securities firm. On buying on margin, the customers will make a profit by selling off F-Corp shares at a higher price and repaying the borrowed money to the securities firm. The money collateral, the sales proceeds of borrowed securities, and the securities collateral, purchased securities with borrowed money, are also the collateral for the obligation of the customers to the securities firm. Then, what would happen to securities and money held by the securities firm if the securities firm becomes bankrupt? First, let's see what would happen to securities. Securities held by the securities firm for its customers include securities deposited by customers for sale, securities purchased and not yet delivered to customers, securities held in custody. Even if the securities firm goes bankrupt, as far as the securities firm has been segregating customers' securities from its own assets, customers can soon take back their securities. The securities firm is legally required to segregate customers' securities from its own assets. The customers can smoothly take back their securities as far as their securities have been segregated. If some of the customers cannot take back all of their securities because, for example, segregation by the securities firm was not perfect, the Japan Investor Protection Fund steps in and compensates such customers for their losses. The purposes of the Japan Investor Protection Fund, the JIPF, are protecting customers of securities firms and maintaining the reliability of securities transactions. Every securities firm is required to join the JIPF as a member. When customers cannot take back their securities or money from a bankrupt securities firm, the JIPF compensates each customer for the loss incurred by the customer up to 10 million Japanese yen. Please note that professional investors, such as financial institutions, are not protected by the JIPF. Then, let's see what would happen to money. Money held by the securities firm for its customers include sales proceeds of securities not yet paid to customers, purchase money deposited by customers, redemption proceeds of securities held in custody and not yet paid to customers, margin money deposited by customers. If the securities firm goes bankrupt, even though the securities firm has been internally segregating money held for its customers from its own assets, The money would be part of the asset of the securities firm, which shall be used to make payments to all creditors of the securities firm. Customers would be creditors of the securities firm too. But a bankrupt securities firm would not be able to pay its debts in full. Following are problems regarding money held for customers. Customers cannot take back their money as is, even though the securities firm has been internally segregating customers' money. This is because, in Japan, the one who possesses money owns the money. The customers have monetary claims against the bankrupt securities firm, but they cannot expect to receive full payment. Although the JIPF compensates the customers for their losses, losses over 10 million Japanese yen are not compensated, and the JIPF may run out of money if too many customers suffer losses and the amount of compensation becomes huge. Is there any way to protect customers? One way to protect customers is to give them security interests. For example, when the securities firm receives the sales proceeds, that is, when the customers acquire monetary claims against the securities firm, the customers are given security interests in the asset of the securities firm. If the securities firm goes bankrupt, the customers would be able to collect their monetary claims on a priority basis to the extent of the value of the collateral. And when the customers receive the sales proceeds, that is, when their monetary claims are paid in full, their security interests are cancelled, or when the securities firm receives purchase money from customers, the customers are given security interests. And when the securities firm purchases securities, the security interests are cancelled. But it is a complicated procedure. In addition to being complicated, it is not really practicable to give customers security interests because of the characteristics of transactions between the securities firm and its customers. Please see the following. As shown here, it is often the case that customers will not hold monetary claims for a long time. Besides, the composition of customers will change frequently and continuously, as you will see here. These characteristics make it impossible to predict who will be customers of the securities firm when it goes bankrupt, and it is not practicable to give security interests to people who are not identified beforehand. Difficulties in protecting customers for whom the securities firm holds money are as follows. First, internal segregation of money by the securities firm in itself will not protect its customers. Second, protecting customers by giving them security interests would not work because who will be the customers of the now bankrupt securities firm cannot be ascertained beforehand. Then, what shall we do? Here comes the customer segregated fund trust. The customer's segregated fund trust is established as follows. The securities firm entrusts money received from or for its customers, which is called customer segregated funds, to a trust bank or trust company. The securities firm is the settlor of this trust, and the trust bank or company is the trustee. And customers of the securities firm are designated as beneficiaries. Please note that the beneficiaries include both current customers and people who will become customers in the future. And an employee of the securities firm who is an internal control manager or performing a similar duty is appointed as beneficiaries agent and makes decisions with respect to the trust on behalf of all beneficiaries. Following is a summary of the customer segregated fund trust. The securities firm is legally required to entrust the customer segregated funds, that is, customers' money, to a trust bank or trust company. Customers of the securities firm, including future customers, are designated as beneficiaries. The beneficiaries agent makes decisions regarding the customer segregated fund trust in the interest of both current and future customers. The customer segregated fund trust is administered as follows. The securities firm is legally required to calculate the amount of the customer segregated funds for each customer and entrust the amount of the customer segregated funds for all customers. The securities firm is legally required to recalculate the amount of the customer segregated funds at least once a week, and if the recalculated total amount exceeds the trust assets, entrust additional money to cover the deficiency. If the recalculated total amount is less than the trust assets, the securities firm may withdraw the surplus from the trust. The trust assets are invested in government bonds and other safe assets. If the securities firm becomes bankrupt, the beneficiaries of the customer segregated fund trust would be fixed to the customers of the securities firm at that time, and the beneficiaries' agent would be switched to the JIPF. The beneficiaries' agent would pay back money to the customers from the trust assets. In case that the trust assets are not sufficient to pay back all money, payment would be made on a pro rata basis. Customers of the securities firm at the time of its bankruptcy become the beneficiaries of the customer segregated fund trust. The JIPF becomes the beneficiary's agent to administer the money payment process. In case that the trust assets are not sufficient to pay back all money to the customers because of a time lag in recalculation of the customer segregated funds, or failure of the securities firm to comply with the legal requirements, the JIPF compensates each customer for the loss up to 10 million Japanese yen. But even in that situation, because a substantial amount of money is paid back from the trust assets, the possibility that the JIPF runs out of money to compensate is largely reduced. Here are the reasons why the trust is used to protect customers for whom the securities firm holds money. The first difficulty is that, unlike in the case of securities, internal segregation of money by the securities firm does not protect its customers when the securities firm becomes bankrupt. The customer segregated fund trust solves this difficulty because it puts the money out of reach of other creditors of the securities firm. The second difficulty is that who would be the customers when the securities firm becomes bankrupt cannot be ascertained beforehand. Designating customers of the securities firm, including future customers, as beneficiaries of the customer segregated fund trust solves this difficulty because customers at the time of the bankruptcy automatically become the beneficiaries of the customer segregated fund trust and are thus protected. This concludes my presentation about the customer segregated fund trust. Thank you for watching.